you join me in a minute's silence, please, in remembrance of the atrocity in New Zealand? Thank you. Creator God, we come from busy lives with personal, national and international worries and concerns. Today we especially remember all those affected by the shootings in New Zealand. We pray that your peace and love surround all who suffer in any way. I pray for our civic leaders and support staff weighed down with concerns and responsibilities, and pray they find inner peace and a clear mind. May our much-loved city be guided by these leaders in fairness and with selfless compassion. Let the wounds of separation and division be healed by opening of hearts to listen to the truth on all sides, allowing them to find a higher truth that includes all. May we all learn to honour and enjoy our diversity and differences as a people deeply touched by our fundamental unity. May we as a people undergo a transformation that will draw individuals to lead our city who embody courage, compassion and a higher vision. May our leaders inspire us, and may we so inspire each other with our potential as individuals and as a city, that a new spirit of forgiveness, caring and honesty be born in our city. May we as a united people move with clear, directed purpose to take our place within the community, to build a better future for all humankind. May we as a city commit ourselves to truly living as one with freedom and justice for all. May God's will be done in our great city, and may his blessings remain on our city leaders and those who have faithfully served our city and are now stepping down. May God's blessing remain on us all forevermore. Amen.
Item 1. Announcements or special business. I've not been notified of any announcements or special business. Item 2. Apologies. Are there any apologies? Thank you. Declarations of interest. Do any members have any personal, fiducial and disclosable pecuniary interest they need to declare for this meeting? Can all members with interest now declare them? Yes. Thank you. Okay. Councillor Green.
Any items includes for Viva or City West Trust. I'm not sure that I need to declare this as a member of the Greater Manchester Waste Recycling Committee.
Thank you. Any further? Thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of January and 27th of February. Are the minutes of the meeting of the council on 15th and 27th of January be approved as a correct record?
Councillor Turner and Councillor Carangarida.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Chair. This is a general comment on the minutes. I noticed that I haven't seen the minutes because they're not in the written form. They're actually on the web. We referred to the webcast. And haven't sat through the council for 3 hours. The last thing I want to do is look again at the webcast. An action replay is not something that I would want to do. I do understand that this formula has been used in previous years for the budget, but I don't really consider it adequate, because the normal procedure would be that if any member had a query or wishes to move an amendment on the minutes, basically they would refer to the page number, the paragraph or the bullet point, and then all members could follow exactly what that said member was proposing or not proposing. So I don't know quite how it would work if I was to raise something on the minutes today, whether you'd have to start playing the screen so we could all see it. But all I'm saying is I don't want to debate on it today, but I do think that it's something that perhaps the City Mayor, myself and the monitoring officer could discuss at a later date as a way forward. Thank you.
I've been informed that can be done. Councillor
Carangarida.
Councillor Carangarida.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I just ask on the 15th of January minutes, on question 10, I did actually ask for how much government funding was coming into the City of Salford. We're now up to March, and I still have not had that information. I did raise it at the agenda setting group, and I was hopeful that I would have got it, but just as a point, I have not got it as of yet. And can I also say, in the points that Councillor Turner's made, I actually went on last year's minutes. I clicked on the connection there, and it says this webcast is no longer available.
Councillor Butcher.
Putting that together, but there's quite a lot of information there. We've got probably more than half of it now, so you should have it quite shortly.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you very much for that, but it was January. We're now up to March. I would have thought in January, February, March, 2 months, that they could actually have been done. I understand that there was a difficulty because you've got the budget, but I don't expect to have to wait another 2 months for the reply.
Okay. The item 5, receipt of petitions, communications. Do you have any petitions to be received?
Councillor Lancaster, Councillor Mullen.
Take up with the passenger transport the issue of the service 100, which was removed off Peel Green area and diverted over the new bridge and across the canal. We're asking for a reinstatement to the original route because they've now no bus service in that area.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a petition here for the restoration of the 100 bus back to Barton residents. There are a number of elderly residents that have been severely affected by this change in route, and I've got 115 signatures here for the council to consider.
Any further? Nominations for Officer of Ceremonial Mayor. Can I now call upon the proposer, John Merry, seconded by Councillor Jim King and supported by Councillor Karen Garrido, that Councillor Charlie McIntyre be appointed to the office of Ceremonial Mayor for the municipal year 2019 to 2020, after which I'll permit members to ask questions. Thank you. Yeah.
You'll be delighted to know I'm not proposing to make a speech today. I shall be leaving that till May, to give you all ample warning. But I'm really pleased to move the name of Councillor McIntyre to be ceremonial mayor next year.
Likewise, I'm not going to make any speech about my fellow Cliff resident, Councillor McIntyre, but I'm delighted to second the nomination for Councillor McIntyre to be the ceremonial mayor for the coming municipal year. Thank you very much.
Oh.
Mr Mayor, thank you very much. On behalf of our group, can I say that we are delighted that Councillor McIntyre is going to be the chair, the ceremonial mayor for next year. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Does the council agree that Councillor Charlie McIntyre be appointed to the office of ceremonial mayor for the municipal year 2019-2020? Thank you. Nominations for office of deputy ceremonial mayor. There's been a change to members now for proposing and seconding the nomination. It will now be proposed by Councillor David Jolly, seconded by Councillor Michelle Barnes and supported by Councillor Karen Garrido, that Councillor John Mullen be appointed for the office of Deputy Mayor, Ceremonial Mayor for the municipal year 2019-2020, after which I pick members to ask questions. Councillor Jolly.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm very pleased to nominate my fellow ward councillor, Councillor John Mullen, to the office of Deputy Ceremonial Mayor for the municipal year 2019-2020. Oh, sorry.
I'd just like to second that proposal and would like John to the seat next year.
Karen Garrido.
Conservative group, I'd like to support the nomination of Councillor Mullen to be Deputy Mayor. It's a great honour. Thank you very much.
Any questions, comments? Membership of the committees and panels 2018-19. The City Mayor is asked to present the amendments to the membership of the committee and panels, after which House will make questions.
Happy to move the report.
Any questions? Yes, Councillor Garrido.
Yeah, shouldn't Councillor Wilson have remained a member of the committees he served until today, when the resolution was passed? I understand, in fact, he was taken off straight away.
Point of clarification, Chair. When a person ceases to be a member of a party, the appointment ceases immediately. I'm afraid the error was in my department. It's very often the case that after a member doesn't stand or there's a by-election, the change happens. We didn't have an immediate process to write to a member in those circumstances and advise them of what had happened. I have done it now, and we have amended our procedures.
Okay. Mr. Saunders. Councillor Saunders.
Thank you. I wasn't going to say anything on this, but given the monitoring officer's answer, I think I'm right in saying that, unlike the Labour Party, the Conservative Party in government did not remove their defectors who joined this new group, including Dr. Sarah Wollaston, who was allowed to continue the chair of the Health Committee, not just being a member on the... Well, okay.
And as members, we should talk about, this is the council chamber for the city of Salford. I personally think that should be discussions. It's only relevant when it affects us. Thank you.
Councillor John Ferguson.
Councillor John Ferguson.
Don't want to prolong the meeting out, but just to remind the members of the opposition of the rules of the composition of scrutiny committees. It's done on proportionality to the size of various political parties in the council, and when a member ceases to be a member of that political party, he ceases then to be entitled to that place that's reserved for that political party. It's straightforward, it seems to me.
Thank you. Councillor asked to note the arising amendments to the membership of City Council committees and panels for 2018-19. As the Constitution stands, it's to be noted. Thank you. Agreed. Salford City Council Constitution Amendment minutes. The city solicitor is asked to present the amendments to the Constitution, after which I will make questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a report to advise Council that there has been an amendment to the Constitution to correct a comma placed in the wrong place. It was purely a typographical error, and I've made the amendment under the delegated authority to me as the monitoring officer. There is a further report which was planned to be submitted to full council in July of 2019 with regard to a number of additional amendments to the Constitution. At a meeting of the Standards Committee yesterday, Standards Committee felt that it would not be ready in July and that it was appropriate to bring it to a later meeting. So there will be some amendments to the Constitution during the next municipal year, and we will bring those back to council for full consideration.
Thank you. The council is asked to note the amendments of the City Council's constitution. Is that agreed? Yes, Council.
Certainly no problem with the motion, but can I take this opportunity of pointing out that I think the council could do better with regards to typographical errors and so on. For example, here is a letter sent to every single council taxpayer in the city, signed by no less an august pair. There's the city mayor and Councillor Hines, which talks of a finding crisis. That seems to be something like happens in my house in the morning when I can't find where I left my shoes the night before. So I would ask the council officers if they could up the game on things like that. And also, if I can take the opportunity of pointing out on page 141 in the part that is attached to the draft. It's the pay policy statement for 2019-2020. It refers to the funding of elections, and one of the things it states is that Police and Crime Commissioner elections are funded by central government, so it doesn't fall on the council. Can I point out we no longer have a Police and Crime Commissioner? That has been subsumed into the duties of the Mayor, who is now Police and Crime Commissioner, and that election is not mentioned.
I've been informed that is still the case. That's the...
Yeah, Chair, through you, election fees, notwithstanding the fact that we have a Greater Manchester Mayor, he also has the role of the Police, Crime and Fire Commissioner in Greater Manchester. The legislation governing the elections, which I think is probably still seared into my brain, are Police and Crime Commissioner elections. In some places, the office is held by an elected mayor, but the statutory requirement is for the PCC elections.
Thank you. The council is asked to note an amendment to the City Council's constitution. Agreed? Item 10, pay policy statement. The lead member for Workforce and Industrial Relations is asked to present the pay policy report, after which I'll permit questions.
Thank you, Chair. I am noticing that people are trying to be brief this morning in presenting reports, and so I'll try to do the same. But this is something that the pay policy statement is something that we're required by legislation to do every year, and we have produced the pay policy for 2019-20, which sets out our local pay arrangements, and we also take the opportunity within the statement to promote the good work that's happening in Salford, and this includes our grade 8 priorities, our values, and continuing to be an accredited living wage employer. The key updates this year include the implementation of the NGC National Pay Agreement for 2019, where changes to the national pay spine have resulted in the need to change our local pay arrangements. These changes have required a period of negotiation with the joint trade unions to reach a collective agreement on a local pay model, and Salford City Council were the first local authority in the North West to reach that collective agreement. The new pay model has been positive for all employees, maintaining the integrity of the current pay model and offering minimum disruption. All employees receive a minimum of 2% pay increase, with those within the lower grades receiving more. Over 200 individuals on the lower pay grades are set to receive a pay increase of over 7% from the 1st of April. The pay policy statements provides information on pay ratios from the highest to lowest paid employee. This is 1 to 9.29. Last year it was 1 to 9.67. and we remain one of the lowest in Greater Manchester. In line with our agreed framework for apprentice pay, the rates have been updated, and new apprentices will commence on £8.21 per hour, and within 12 months will receive the living wage of £9 an hour. That's the foundation living wage of £9 an hour. These rates remain higher than the national apprenticeship rates. For the second year, we're reporting on our gender pay gap in line with the legislation. Gender pay gap is different from equal pay and is largely affected by workforce composition. The mean and median gender pay gaps have reduced over the last 12 months. The City Council's mean gender pay gap is 13.3%, a reduction from 14.5% last year, and the median pay gap is 15.4%, and this was 19.3% in 2018. And the UK national mean gender pay gap is 17.9%. So Salford City Council remains significantly lower than this. As a gender report has been produced, which I would commend members to. Some key points within it is that we're proud to retain service delivery in-house for catering, cleaning, which provides an opportunity for Salford residents. This does, however, impact on the gender pay gap due to the high proportion of those in the lower grade posts being female. There's an increase in females within our higher pay bands and now an even split between women and men in the 10 highest paid positions. We're increasing the number of positions being advertised as flexible to encourage a better work-life balance, and the next steps include developing directorate action plans, strengthening our approach to flexible working and working carers, and supporting the GM for Women 2028. The Council needs to approve this report, and when it has been approved, it will then be published on our Council website. So I would commend both the report and the gender pay gap reports to the Council.
Thank you. The Council is asked to approve the content of the draft policy statement for 2019-20.
Councillor Garrido and Councillor Lancaster.
Councillor Robin Greedo.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the report. I certainly think it is on APs in the right direction. Can I couple that also with the fact that, of course, the national figures were also published yesterday, and these figures are replicated across the board with an increase in pay. I think the figure, I'm not going to in front of me, but I think something around about 3.9% across the board, and that's also reflected in the fact that the gender gap has the increase on female works has also increased, and the gender gap has narrowed in that respect. And I'd also couple that with the fact that, of course, we have seen also another substantial drop, as well as getting the increase in wages. We've also seen a substantial drop in unemployment as well, particularly in the North West.
Councillor Lancaster.
Yeah. Councillor Lancaster.
Sorry, I'm not on this one, I'm on the January.
Right. Thank you.
City Mayor.
City Mayor.
Thank you. Can I congratulate Councillor Ferguson and the officers on this report? I think it demonstrates continued improvement in terms of what this City Council is achieving in terms of employment standards and addressing the gender pay gap. However, what I would like to draw attention to is the fact that we do actually employ some of our workers directly as a City Council. It's quite interesting to see how gender pay gaps play out up and down the country. Colleagues within this chamber will know that our cleaners and our catering staff are directly employed by the City Council. And you'll also be aware that Salford City Council is currently still the only accredited living wage employer in Greater Manchester, paying our staff the real living wage, which I think is an absolutely fantastic achievement. And obviously every year we get informed of the latest living wage, and then we have 6 months on which to implement that. And no member of staff in this organisation is paid any less than the real accredited living wage. Now, I don't know if colleagues have seen, but there seems to be talk about the Conservative Party not meeting their own national minimum wage target of £9 an hour, which has recently come out within some budget statements. I think it was the spring statement that drew attention to this, and it was in the small print. But I'd be interested to know, in terms of the opposition, as a City Council were committed to paying the real living wage, is your party committed to the announcements made under George Osborne of paying people the national minimum wage of £9 an hour by your determined date? This is obviously a big issue. We're doing our bit in this chamber, but I'm a bit concerned about recent announcements from the Tory party about your commitment to a national minimum wage. I want to just draw a distinction between the language games that are played here. The government often talk about national minimum wage, but there's no robust methodology that underpins all of that work, as colleagues in this chamber will know. It's an arbitrary figure that has no grounding in reality in terms of what it actually costs to make ends meet in what is, a really difficult world in which we find ourselves, where inflation is far outstripping rises in wages. So I'm deeply concerned at these developments on the part of the government. I'm really concerned about the impact it'll have on the residents in this city. And obviously one of the things I will be doing is making representation through our Conservative colleagues to understand what commitment your party has to paying people the real living wage. But thanks, Councillor Ferguson, I think it's a great achievement. I'm really proud that we pay all of our members of staff in this organisation at least the real living wage, not the government's language game of a national minimum wage. And long may we do so in this chamber. Thank you very much.
Any further questions? Councillor Ferguson.
Just to confirm that the figures that you've got are relating to the 31st of March 2018, so they're virtually 12 months old of the current situation. I'm afraid you'll have to wait for 12 months to get that. But I would particularly, talking about the gender pay gap, draw your attention to this page in the gender pay gap report, because I remember last year when we did it, there were comments being made about how we were the worst in Greater Manchester. And I was concerned when I saw those figures until we actually understood the reason for it. And that was because of the large number of cleaning staff that we have, where other local authorities have found that out outside sources. And there are other factors like that. So it is to do with the makeup of the workforce. And so I was really keen, rather than just having a blanket figure given for the whole of the workforce, you'll see on this page that it's broken down by the various grades and how in each grade the gender pay gap is very, very small indeed. So I would commend that to you.
With no further questions, the Council is asked to approve the content of the draft pay policy statement. All those in favour say aye. Gambling Act 2005. Councillor Lang.
I won't go through the 50-odd pages which are in the report. Every member's had the report. And questions and opportunities for members to alter the report have been, for the last 2 months, there's been a consultation report on this report with all our partners, with elected members and others, and we have had some responses from elected members, so I thank them for that response as well, which came in. I want to make it clear we have a duty as a local authority under the Gambling Act 2005 to review the policy every 3 years. That review, well, it has taken place, as I said. The Act requires 3 policy objectives: preventing gambling from being a source of crime and disorder, being associated with crime and disorder, or being used to support crime. Ensuring that gambling is conducted in a fair and open way, and protection of children and other vulnerable persons from being harmed by, exploited by gambling. These are crucial policy issues. I don't need to say any more. As far as I'm concerned, the document speaks for itself, but if there is any further objections or comments which are in need, by all means let me have them, but I'm satisfied, having gone through the whole report of my lead member, that a lot of work's been put in to verify this. And I would also like to thank our licensing team and the licensing committee for the work they've done on the premises to make sure they comply with that act. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Councillor Walmsham.
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome this act. Obviously, as Chair of Licensing, you'd expect me to comment. I think that the guidelines in this are very strong for us as a city. I think those of you that sit on licensing know the work that we do and the things that we have to do, particularly in this around gambling and making sure, as Councillor Lancaster has said, the crime element, you know, we know that gambling can be related to crime, but more sincerely it's the protection of children, the protection of our vulnerable citizens, and that is sort of most at the forefront of my heart as Chair of Licensing. I think members remember the notes of motion that we moved regarding the fixed dog betting terminals in this council chamber, seconded by Councillor Clarkson, who is his last day as a councillor in this council chamber today, and I thank him for his support. You know, also, he's been a great member of the licensing panel. But I do welcome this, and I think, you know, Councillor Lancaster's right. This is an important document for us as a city, and I hope that members of the licensing and those that come on licensing read it thoroughly, understand it and digest. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Robin Greedo.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I also welcome the report. As a former member of the licensing panel for many years, it's been evident for quite a long time that changes need to be made. I actually regretted the introduction of the 2005 Licensing Act, which I think made far too many liberal type changes to the licensing law. I'm glad now, in fact, that some of those are being rectified. Certainly as far as Councillor Walmsham refers to the fixed on machines, I think those were a terrible introduction, caused a lot of heartache, a lot of people to get themselves into terrific amount of debt. I think this at least goes some way now towards solving those problems. So I too, and the Conservative group, welcome this report.
Thank you. Are there any further comments? The Council has to approve and adopt the Gambling Act Statements of Policy 2019. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Anybody against? No. Tackling Poverty Strategy Year 2, 2018-19. The statutory city mayor has to present the Tackling Poverty Strategy, after which I'll permit questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. 2 years ago, the City Mayor launched our Tackling Poverty Strategy, No One Left Behind, and we set out a very ambitious vision for a fairer and more inclusive Salford, where everyone is able to live fulfilling lives, free from poverty and inequality. In this time, much has been achieved in Salford to deliver better outcomes for some of our most vulnerable residents, and this has been recognised both nationally and in Greater Manchester as a beacon of best practice. However, while our work to tackle poverty can act as a lifeline against some of the worst effects of deprivation, the fact remains that the levels of poverty and inequality in the UK is still growing. I've mentioned before in Council the damning reports from the United Nations, Joseph Rowntree Foundation and End Child Poverty. They found that poverty in the United Kingdom continues to get worse. We also know the full rollout of universal credit in the city since September 2018 is pushing even more people into poverty and destitution, with evidence clearly showing that universal credit is leading to increased rent arrears, debt and the threat of eviction. Salford CAB is already reporting a huge 114% increase in the number of people experiencing problems with the universal credit since the beginning of the rollout, and this is likely to rise even further as more people are transferred onto it. I was asked recently why a food bank would object to double yellow lines outside, because if its people could buy petrol to park there, then they could buy food. Clearly I thought about this, but what it is a symptom of in-work poverty or people who have serious health problems. You need petrol to get to work and keep a roof over your head, but you can't then afford to buy food or heat the home or buy shoes for school. It's juggling your finances to make ends meet, and my heart goes out to families who have to go through this week after week after week with no end in sight under this government, because despite evidence and despite so many organisations telling them, they're still in denial about the level of poverty in our country. This is also a major cause of other crises in our communities, such as mental health and homelessness. There are huge challenges in our communities, and we have needed to be resourceful in using what is limited resources that we do have to mitigate the damage that poverty can and is doing. And 2 years on from launching the strategy, we've produced our second annual progress report to highlight the work taking place in the city. You'll find this report in your papers and also online. For example, this year we've continued to work closely with the Poverty Truth Commission and debt advice agencies, including Salford CAB, and our own Welfare Rights and Debt Advice team, to look for ways to further improve how we recover council tax debt, following our decision last year to stop using bailiffs to collect debt from our most vulnerable residents. We're now providing more intensive face-to-face help and support for those facing severe financial hardship through the very well-attended Better Off coffee and chat sessions in our city gateway centres. This is where anyone in arrears with money problems is invited to get help to work out a council tax payment plan and sort out long-term financial situations that are sustainable for them. We've introduced new automatic claim for council tax reduction for eligible households claiming universal credit, so people will no longer miss out on that entitlement. Also, with completely redesigning our council tax bills and reminder notices to provide better information about the range of help that's available. We've again retained our council tax reduction scheme at its current level for the 4th year running, helping more than 25,000 people on the lowest incomes, while many other councils across the country are cutting back on their support. I'm also pleased to say that our work in this area has been recognised by the Money Advice Service as national best practice and is featured in their own report as an example of how other councils can improve debt collection. This is a testament to the work of our fantastic officers and the dedication of our Salford residents. Our investment in Salford Credit Union has continued to pay dividends, with membership increasing by a further 16% to now over 4,000, saving members more than 1.6 million in potential high interest charges this year alone.
30 seconds.
To tackle food poverty in the city, we've continued to work closely with the Salford Food Share Network to ensure continuation of vital food crisis support. Regardless of the process you will see outlined in the report, there are still many challenges to overcome, and we'll continue to deliver the City Mayor's strategy, working with all our partners to develop new ideas to support people living in poverty. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
10 minutes for the item, not for the speech. 10 minutes for the item.
Are there any questions? Councillor Hines. Sorry? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I commend Councillor Boschell's report there. I think it shows good progress of what we're doing in this city. But quite frankly, don't anybody in his chamber today feel ashamed that we live in this country, the fifth, sixth or sixth largest economy in the world, that we are even debating this today, that poverty today in 2019 is an absolute shameful position to be in. I just cannot understand how people can walk by knowing quite well that perhaps their neighbours are in dire straits, struggling to feed the kids, to clothe the kids, getting themselves in deep debt because there's no other way to do it, and just shrug the shoulders. I think it's an absolute disgrace in this day and age. And Ian Duncan Smith commenting over the weekend of Red Nose Day, where the people presented it. I didn't see it myself, but I've read about it. Commenting that it was an advert for Jeremy Corbyn. This was no advert for Jeremy Corbyn. This was the truth, that where we're living today and people are in poverty. And people are actually going hungry. There's no doubt about that. And Ian Duncan Smith uses the comment, this is absolutely ridiculous. This is a man that has no connection at all with the poverty-stricken peoples of this world. He lives in an ivory tower almost. And anybody that comments in this way, shape or form is termed an idiot. Good God, what are we living in today? What are we living in? I said many, many times, and I confess it's an issue for us. I'm proud of what we've done as a city, as we're growing economically, as investment comes in. But we're still the 22nd most deprived city in this country. I call it a tale of two cities, quite honestly. And I've said this many, many times. And therefore, we're now looking at the fair funding requirements. I think we spoke about it last time during the budget, where at the moment deprivation hasn't got anything like the weighting that we need to tackle this cancer in our society, this poverty that's living with. We've almost become used to it, that, well, we're going to have poverty. That's how it is, that's how it's always been. But it hasn't always been like that. We have been able to help people, and we want a government that is determined to help these people, like the city mayor with the policies that he's took on since becoming mayor nearly 3 years ago, is paying dividends for people. We're still a long way to go, but I commend this report that Paula Boschell's made today. Thank you.
Thank you. City Mayor.
Can I thank Councillor Boschell for the report? And colleagues may have seen the weekend just passed, but at least 20 councils in England have actually stopped emergency welfare funding for the most deprived people or the most destitute people within our communities and our cities and towns and villages up and down this country. That's an absolute disgrace. There is a direct relationship between poverty and destitution and what's happening with local government finance. Local welfare assistance slumped from 172 million to 46 million pounds since 2013, pushing more and more people into poverty and destitution. And only this week, one of our food banks in the city, Coffee for Craig, is asking for more tinned meat to enable people to actually make ends meet and put together food parcels so they can actually eat. Absolutely disgraceful what's happening in this country. Andy Burnham talks about a humanitarian crisis. when we look at homelessness in Greater Manchester and rough sleeping on our streets. And then when we look to welfare reform and what this government has been doing since 2010, bedroom tax, benefits frozen since 2015, despite the cost of living significantly rising within British society. Rollout of universal credit, people having to wait 4 weeks before they even get their money to make ends meet, in and out of work, benefit cap, significantly impacting larger families. And our Jewish community and Muslim community in the city have been making us aware of this recently. Absolutely disgraceful in terms of how these reforms play out within the BAME community of the United Kingdom. Then on top of that, young people, local housing allowance cap for under 35s, pushing people into houses of multiple occupation because they simply can't get houses. Chronic undersupply of council housing and social housing for many, many years over consecutive governments, and a labour market plagued by part-time employment, low pay, insecurity, 0-hour contracts, house prices rising, wages stagnating. This is an absolute disgrace, and the government think everything's great in the garden, everything's rosy in the garden. I applaud Councillor Boschel for her fantastic work on tackling poverty in this city and doing it in a really robust and strategic and accountable way, regularly updating this chamber on the activities that are going on in the city. But make no mistake, the context and the world in which we find ourselves does not get any easier. Poverty, insecurity, destitution has been created by the Conservative government since 2010. And it's a disgrace that they're doing very little to tackle these systemic issues that we all struggle with within society. So thank you, Councillor Boschel, but I have to tell every member of this council, the challenge does not get any easier at all. In fact, the challenge before us only gets harder. Thank you very much.
Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very, very brief. I very much welcome the report by Councillor Boschel. I always say that there are two arms, if you like, to wealth. There is wealth creation, and then there is wealth retention. We still, in Greater Manchester, Salford and Greater Manchester in the North West, are very good at wealth creation, but we're not always that good at wealth retention, because much of the wealth is extracted from us. Councillor Boschel has also mentioned the correlation between wealth and health. When you seriously reduce people's wealth, you also have a significant impact on people's health, including people's mental health. I know, as the chair of Salford Credit Union, that the debt levels in the city are frightening, and equally throughout the whole of Greater Manchester, indeed the North West and beyond. There are high levels of county court judgments, for example. That means that people can't borrow money from organisations like credit unions simply because their debt levels are too high, and there's therefore too high a risk. And we are controlled, of course, by government about the amount of risk we can take in terms of lending. That means that these people are therefore forced to go to payday lenders and other extreme high interest level organisations. We know too that over the past few years, Salford Credit Union has saved the people of Salford between £1 and £2 million, and that's money that's spent locally, is retained locally, and that money is spent in local shops, and therefore to some degree protecting some of the local shops that are in danger of closing. We know too that across Greater Manchester, something in the region of 70,000 people are what's called unbanked. The impact of that, of course, is that the big banks won't allow them to have an account, therefore they can't pay their gas and electricity and other bills by the normal processes. It therefore means that there's a poverty premium, and the poverty premium affects people who are poor. That means that it's driving them into even greater poverty, and the levels of the poverty premium vary depending on which research document that you study, but between £300 and £500 per annum is the cost of that poverty premium. That's the result, I'm afraid, of austerity and other policy proposals and activities by the central government. Therefore, I believe, we're only scratching at the surface of poverty in my view, but we need to retain more wealth if we're going to improve the conditions of people who are suffering from poverty across Salford and indeed across the whole of Greater Manchester and beyond. Thank you, Chair.
Well done, Jim.
Is that right?
Councillor Karen Greeno.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to place on record my thanks to Councillor Boshall. I think that her and her team do great work. But I just want to take exception to a couple of points. One is, Councillor Hines said that this is a tale of two cities. I'd like to know what he actually means by a tale of two cities. I think we actually know that he's getting at certain parts within the city. If he's not, perhaps he'd like to correct me on that. Because in my area, our elderly people...
Personal what part of the constitution?
If Councillor Karen Garrido doesn't understand what I meant by that, it's a point. It is, yes. She asked me the question.
Can I please make a statement? If anyone wishes to make a point of personal explanation, you have one sentence to explain why it is a point of personal explanation. I will then contact the monitoring officer and then we will discuss. Thank you. And I think we ought to remember that this is all being filmed. My inbox is getting rather full. Thank you.
For what it's worth, in terms of a point of personal explanation, Councillor Karen Garrido invited Councillor Hines to make a point of personal explanation with regard to his comment about two cities. To my mind, that fulfills the criteria for a point of personal explanation, so long as he refers only to what he was saying in his earlier presentation.
Councillor Hines.
The point is, as I said, we're proud that we bring in much needed investment that helps all the way through. But at the same time, because of governments that are not helping us to look after the needy in this city, and therefore they're falling by the wayside. We're doing everything that we can to assist that, but we need more than that, and that's government. And I made reference to the Fair Funding Act, which doesn't help those people in any way, shape or form. I hope that answers your question.
You've often another track.
Sorry, thank you. No, I can't accept that. I think you were being a little bit with the tale of two cities. I think you were getting at the people. I personally feel, that's my explanation, right? And I have to say to you that those people may be, have property rich, but they are absolutely poverty, cash poor. We have a lot of elderly people within our area, right, who actually have got expensive houses, but they didn't buy them when they were expensive, Mr. Mayor. And they were engineers at Gardeners and places like that. And their wives looked after them. And then unfortunately, their wives have died. And they are absolutely struggling. And we have now had to have, within Worsley, a luncheon every month, right, which is run by the local community association for these people to actually go to. So it is all over, if you want to call it poverty. And I have to say that I do take great exception to this tale of two cities. And you've said it every year, you've said it all the time, you said that yourself, and I don't agree with it. And can I say that I know what Councillor Bushell was saying with regards to the food bank. Why are they not using public transport? because you're telling us, this council, that we should be using. Exactly. And why is there none? It's because it's run by Greater Manchester, which has all Labour controlled, right? So I just want to say that. And secondly, I think we ought to be looking on this poverty strategy to the elderly. I noticed the need, and I welcome that. I welcome that part within the document about the young people who are falling through the net, who are not applying for anything. And I think that's an excellent way of going forward. But can I also suggest that we might have to look at some of our elderly people as well? And so if we could act that within the third year. But I do welcome the document. It's very, very thorough, and it's very, very, and it does make you think about what you are and how lucky you are. But we've all been there. Some of us have been there more than others. But we have all been there, that there's been times when we've actually not known how we were going to put food on the table. But I think it comes back also to education. We need to be educating our children to actually know how to cook. When my sons were at home, we did teach them how to cook, and they could actually make a cottage pie out of nothing, really. So I think that we need to be showing people and children on how they should be cooking. You know, a pound of mincemeat goes nowhere. Thank you. It will absolutely feed a family. And I know that that's something that I feel that we should be doing. We should be doing cookery courses.
Councillor Saunders. Thank you. Councillor Saunders.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I can boil a kettle and make some toast, Chair, if that's any use. Can I also join Councillor Greed and my colleague in thanking Councillor Boschel and her colleagues for the hard work that goes into it, and thanking the City Mayor for his comments about the Jewish and Muslim and BAME communities. We don't always agree on how to solve problems, but that doesn't mean that we don't share the concern of the problems. We just have different solutions sometimes. And finally, I hope this isn't going to be sort of bash Councillor Hines morning, but you can take it, Councillor Hines. Councillor Hines mentioned a Conservative politician with regards to Red Nose Day. So will he join me in criticising a Labour politician, colleague of his, David Lammy, who it is suggested caused an £8 million drop in the donations to Red Rose Day by referring to Stacey Dooley as an unnecessary white ambassador for the cause?
Yeah. We've got 3 left, and I don't intend to take any more after that, because we need to adopt the motion before the break.
Is it right?
Yeah, sorry, you're on the list. So, Councillor Merry.
Thank you. I think not for the first time in her life, Ian Duncan Smith has caused Councillor Karen Garrido some major embarrassment, actually, because his remarks seem to imply, Councillor Hines, that Tories are not concerned about hunger and poverty. And I think Councillor Karen Garrido illustrated quite graphically that Tories are concerned about hunger and poverty. And in fact, if I might say so, Councillor Boschel, Councillor Garrido made your points for you very well, actually, when she talked about the need to extend the facilities in Worsley to deal with the issues of poverty. Does it not occur to her that the reason she's having to extend anti-poverty activity in Worsley is precisely because of her government and what her government is doing? And just to deal with a couple of points from the debate, public transport is not controlled by the Labour Party. It is actually controlled, thanks to the Conservative government, by private companies who decide where they can make their profits, in order, in fact, of course, in some cases, to make donations to the Conservative Party and to the Leave campaign. So I'm not taking any lessons on why we are responsible for the problems in public transport. Councillor Saunders, you must have read the briefings that Interlink have provided to us on the effect of benefit cuts. And I'm a bit disappointed. I appreciate that it was a fairly tokenistic effort, if I might say so, speaking out on behalf of the local community. I appreciate that your heart's in the right place. But the fact remains, by limiting benefit payments to new claimants in terms of their children, in terms of issues around internet and about getting access to what's happening, these are attacks on my community as well as your community, because I represent those people. And I was shocked when I was talking to Michelle Siffer, as you were, Mr. Mayor, in terms of the Jigsaw project, at exactly the levels of poverty she's having to deal with in the community as a result. So for all of those reasons, I would hope that we can unite in this chamber in terms of a proper approach to these issues, in terms of acknowledging the difficulties that universal credit and other things are causing. And the fact remains that, yes, poverty extends across the city, whether it's Worsley, whether it's Broughton, whether it's Langworthy. Every ward is suffering at the moment, and it's time that this government started to respond to the needs of Salford rather than the needs of the city, which I think is what Councillor Hines is referring to. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robert Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's one thing we can all agree on, that there's poverty right across the city, regardless of whether you live in Worsley, Boothstown, the more affluent areas, whether you live in Langworthy and Little Hulton, which are the least affluent areas. Everyone in this chamber can agree, I'm sure, that we have poverty, and the work that Paula Boschel, the officers and the partners have done have been absolutely phenomenal in supporting some of our most vulnerable residents. I think the debate sometimes in this chamber has gone a little bit skewed and is missing the point that we have poverty in this city, and everyone can get behind the work that Paul has done and support it, and there's going to be a lot more work in the future as some people continue to fall more and more into poverty. So I'm glad this has come today. I'm glad to have read it through and seen some of the good work that's been going on, and I hope it continues into the future. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Councillor Antrobus.
Grateful for Councillor Merry and Councillor Sharp just perhaps correcting some of the misapprehensions from Councillor Mrs Greedo in particular. I do think that from Councillor Mrs Greedo that there is a misunderstanding of what Councillor Hines meant when he talked about the two cities, because when we talk about the two cities, what we mean is that the very wealthy live side by side with poverty. It's not about where you live, it's the circumstances in which you live. And that is the important thing that we need to hold on to. Now, obviously, your wealth, the amount of money that you have, does have some impact on where you live, but that's not the whole story. And it's wrong to portray Councillor Hines' remarks in that way. And Councillor Merry has also noted the other misunderstanding by Councillor Mrs Garrido, and that is the issue around public transport. Public transport in Greater Manchester is still run on the basis of the legislation, which means that it is up to the private sector, it is up to the market primarily to determine where the bus routes go. And the only intervention that the Greater Manchester Transport can make is in terms of subsidies, and thanks to government austerity, those subsidies have been reduced year on year. So, you know, let's not start playing party politics with this. The reality is that it's because of something that everybody in this chamber at one time used to oppose, and that is that legislation which leaves public transport to the market, because it's not the way to provide public transport. And I do think that the remarks on what you do with ingredients and how you make decent meals with ingredients were quite frankly patronising. The problem in the reason why we have food banks is people can't get the ingredients in the first place, and that's what we've got to remember. And I just want to finish up with one issue that was mentioned by Councillor Hines at the start of his speech, and that is about austerity. What was the point of austerity? And we were always told that it was about making sure that we created the right conditions so that we could have a richer economy. And once we had a richer economy, we'd be able to share all the additional wealth with all those who were denied it at the moment. That's right. And Councillor Hines also reminded us that we are, depending on which data you look at, the 5th or 6th richest economy in the world. How wealthy does this country have to be before it starts to share the amazing wealth that it's got? That is the real issue. And the real issue is not about the management of the economy. It is about the ideology. It's about the principles. It's about the priorities. Are you in favour of a more equal society where the poor are helped, or are you in favour of a free market society where only the rich benefit? That is the issue. That's the issue that's before us today, and I know which side our party is on. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll now take the vote. The council. No, I'm sorry, not the vote. It's the note. It's note of the item 12, tackling poverty. All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Anybody against? Thank you. We'll now take the break and deal with item 13 when we return in 15 minutes' time. Please be seated. The monitoring.
Sorry.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to raise a point of order.
Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. At the conclusion of the last session, when the meeting finished and you were being escorted out of the chamber, my understanding is we're asked to stand and show respect to you. I think it's inappropriate for members of the council to be carrying on political arguments about points that other people have been speaking. I think that you need to be shown respect by all members of the council when you're leading the chamber, and that needs to be reiterated.
Some explanation here. Is he supposed to quote the particular part of the Constitution which the order's been raised on?
It's section 24 which deals with the conduct of meetings.
I think we're making very heavy weather of this, but I thank Councillor Ferguson. We are to respect each other. The monitoring officer is going to make a statement regards who can vote on the next item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Ferguson has already expressed to me that as a member of Unite, he has a personal non-pecuniary interest, and I felt it may be appropriate to advise members, as the point was brought up by another member as well, that if members are Unite members, they may wish to consider whether they need to make a personal non-pecuniary interest disclosure. That would not stop any members from voting. just make a note of who members are. So I'll read that. Councillor Warner, Councillor King.
I think it might be easy.
Councillor Hunt.
I think it might be easier to list those or not.
Councillor Jones. Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Ryan. Councillor Dawson. Councillor Stone. Councillor Hines. Okay, you can put your hands down. Councillor. Sorry. Yeah, Bellamy, Bentham, Critchley, Birch, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Dickman, Councillor Hines, I've got you, thank you. Councillor Mullen, all three on the back row. Councillor Pevitt, Councillor Neil Reynolds.
Right, yes. Item 13, notice of motion adoption of the United Construction. Councillor John Ferguson asked to move the motion and Councillor Stuart Dittman to second the motion, after which I'll permit members to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There's a famous photo, I'm sure that most people have seen it. It's of a group of construction workers having the lunch on a girder above New York, 840 feet above New York, in the construction of the Rockefeller Centre. It was taken in 1932 and perhaps gave an indication of the attitudes towards health and safety on construction sites back in the 1930s. Unfortunately, whilst things have improved, the latest figures for fatalities on construction sites in the UK are, in 2017-18, there were 38 fatal injuries, and 48 of those were falling from height. That's just one fact in relation to the British construction industry. When I was starting my working life, the lump was starting. The lump is a term that Councillor Pevitt is perhaps showing his age, that he knows what it is, or a knowledge of it. There were certain, and probably people who are in trade unions know about it. I did notice when you were declaring your interest and putting your hands up that photographs were being taken from the other side of the chamber. Perhaps sometime we'll ask people to put their hands up to indicate those people who are not members of trade unions and don't understand some of these things. But, as I say, the lump was there, and it was a thing that was used by employers to get around paying holiday pay, sick pay, etc. There's also the issue of blacklisting that takes place, where people are prevented from working on construction sites and because of their trade union activity. And other things about it. It's only last week that we had the incident on Regent Road, where workers working on that improvement down tools because they'd not been paid. Their employer was not paying them. And it's for some of these reasons that Unite has developed this construction charter, and which has been adopted by many councils throughout the country. I'm not going to go through it all in detail, but just to remind you of some of the headings that are in there. It deals with HMRC regulations that all employers, contractors should comply with HMRC conditions. That health and safety should be a priority on the sites. That there should be trade union safety reps on every site. That there should be proper training and competence of workers actually working on those construction sites, that there should be proper apprenticeships and training, that national agreements should be maintained and kept. There should be appointments of shop stewards and safety reps on every site. There should be a fair recruitment policy, that there's no discrimination against the recruitment of people going onto the sites, and there should be no blacklisting. And there should be access to trade union officials to represent the workers. And also that we're called upon to support the Get Britain building campaign. All I would suggest, reasonable demands and things that we should be doing as a council, and I would be surprised, but no, I wouldn't be surprised if some people spoke against it, but we shall see. So I'm moving the charter, recommend it to the council for adoption, and that we join with those other local authorities that have signed it. And finally, before I sit down, just to get a little plug in, that we will be having, put the note in your diary, on the 26th of April, Friday the 26th of April, we will, at 12 noon, we will be having our annual ceremony to commemorate International Workers' Memorial Day and those people who've died at work outside the little memorial outside the front entrance. So with that, I'll move the motion.
Councillor Stuart Dickman.
Thank you, Chair. This construction charter states that it's a recognised fact that the presence of trade union safety representatives significantly improves safety in the workplace. In 2016, 3 years after retirement, my dad died because he wasn't properly protected in his early working years from asbestos. After years of living with an invisible illness caused by poor working conditions as an apprentice plumber, he suffered a short and painful battle with mesothelioma and died 5 months after diagnosis. But what is also painful is that it was preventable. Even when knowledge of the dangers of asbestos was available, it was many years after my dad and thousands of others were exposed that it was banned. The dangers of asbestos are still with us today and can be found in millions of buildings across the country, meaning people are still being exposed to the dangers of asbestos. Workers are still at risk during demolition and refurbishments of sites, and workers need protecting, not only from asbestos, but from all health and safety dangers. And we as a council need to do all that we can to make workplaces as safe as possible through charters such as this. Ensuring people are able to work safely is highly important. In the building industry, it's a matter of life and death. Everyone has the right to a safe working environment, and the conditions set out in United's construction charter should ensure construction workers have access to a workplace health and safety representative, and that they are treated fairly and safely on council projects. Safety in the workplace is not the only thing in this charter. It also covers for us, as a responsible client, to work with trade unions to achieve the highest standards in respect of direct employment status and terms and conditions of employment. With so much development planned in Salford, we must ensure our policies and procedures protect workers against those employers who wish to exploit them. What we are asking for in this motion is for construction workers to be treated as you would want any member of your family to be treated when they go to work. As many of us in this room already know, suicide is the leading cause of death for men under the age of 50. In 2017, the Office for National Statistics looked at almost 19,000 deaths of people aged between 20 and 64 who had killed themselves in England between 2011 and 2015. They found that low-skilled male construction workers had the greatest risk of suicide of all professions, at 3.7 times above the national average. Whilst building finishing trades such as plasterers, painters and decorators had a risk twice the national average. The ONS suggests that some occupations may have a higher risk of suicide because of low pay and job security. And this is exactly what will happen to more and more of our construction workers if we don't support them and our trade unions to give them the secure work and good pay they deserve. It's our responsibility to make sure those sites procured by or on behalf of the council are not only as safe as they possibly could be, but that our employees are paid the going rate for a job they do and treated with the respect that they deserve. I urge you all to support this very important motion. Thanks.
Thank you. Comments? And I'd ask you to contextualise the discussions, not stopping the discussions, contextualise, because we've got lots of business and we are on regular occasions not finishing. Thank you.
Councillor Lewis.
And
Councillor Lewis.
Councillor Lewis.
Yeah, I'm glad we had the opportunity to express our interest in this as a member of Unite. I also go into schools and talk about, as a Unite member, go into schools and talk about the importance of health and safety generally. And quite recently, in order to help children understand the impact of not having those sort of health and safety regulations that are in this charter, we don't have those, what sort of impact that can have. And to get them to realise the difference, I compare the Olympics that took place in London, where one construction worker died, and compare that to Qatar. And it's actually very difficult to get the numbers of deaths in Qatar because they are so high. But I read that if there was a minute silence for every death that had happened so far in Qatar on that construction project, if a minute silence was held at the World Cup, the first 44 matches would be held in silence. That's quite shocking, but it demonstrates the value and importance of the union involvement, but all our involvement, ensuring that we keep those standards of health and safety as high as possible in the construction industry. Thank you.
Councillor Pevitz.
Yes, to support the motion. Since 1981, there's been a trend in deaths in industry and construction, in all industry across Great Britain, until around about 2012, when it starts to level out. Unfortunately, in the last 12 months, by figures are due, in the construction industry, the deaths there have now risen 27% on the previous year. So it's an ongoing problem. There is a lack of people able to get towards unions, access unions on these sites. We know that. There is a safety card, but from talking to my students, they get onto sites as labourers without safety cards. So this is one of the things that we need to address as well, and that's why this motion should be passed by here. But the rise in death is unacceptable in 2019. And again, it's to do with austerity. Contracts are going in by these things like Red Capita, Carillion, these service industries who go along, put a contract in, we'll do it for this much, take their cut, subcontractor comes in, takes their cut, and by the time it gets to the person on the street who actually working there, they're down to around about 10% of the original money. So that goes on safety, it's missed out. A lot of sites have the sign up, this is a health and safety site. We can guarantee you look around how many will have a hard hat on. And there's no one there to enforce it. So it also means, if we pass this, they want HSE to have more staff to do site inspections as well as unions, because that's what's missing here. No one to enforce the rules. Unions can do all we can, but the government is just letting it go by because it hates profits, health and safety, as I've heard, and that's one of the things about Europe as well. You know, health and safety rules from Europe. Well, why do we need them? Cut the red tape. Yeah, that again, attack health and safety. We'll have, the way it's going, we'll have buildings going up in Manchester with 10 lads on a girder, 800 foot in the air, having their lunch. You know, going back 80 years. So I would say I support this motion because we've got to cut this death rate. You don't go to work to die. You go to work to get money, to live, and have a good work-life balance. We're not getting that these days.
Councillor Brocklehurst.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I should declare an interest in a way because I'm a chartered member of the Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. So I see a lot of claims from the construction industry working for Manchester Council. But I started my working life in the construction industry. And in fact, I was elected as a shop steward at 16 in the construction industry. So my fight against the lump, non-unionised labour, people getting around paying proper taxes, getting around health and safety, cost a lot of lives, a lot of suffering, and a lot of ill health in the construction industry back in the 1970s and 80s when I was working in that industry. What I would say, I'll echo Councillor Pevitt's comments that there has been a levelling off of serious injuries and deaths in the construction industry. And it is a growing concern. And one of the reasons for that is the lack of unionisation, because good employers rely on trade union representatives and safety representatives to feed and give them information about what's happening on the ground, to raise core issues, to raise particularly vital safety issues as work develops, particularly in the construction industry, which can change rapidly due to changing circumstances, even weather conditions, depending on what type of work you're doing, if it's outdoor work. So I would support this motion, say there's still a constant and growing concern about safety in the industry. I also recognise that there's a growing mental health concern about construction workers, due, as was previously said by colleagues, that workers that tend to be in insecure work, don't have the protection of trade unions, often work in isolation, often work in unsafe conditions. They need that protection also, and we can offer them that protection through the work that we do as a local authority, through the work that we do through the North West Procurement Hub that insists on good health and safety regulations being in place for any subcontractors that we use, and also the monitoring of those subcontractors, the monitoring of our own construction workers, the monitoring of subcontractors. We need eyes on the ground, and really it's the trade union movement that we need to strengthen and bolster in the construction industry, because they're providing us with that information. So just say in general, I support and commend this resolution to the council. Thank you.
Thank you. City Mayor.
Can I also support the charter before us and thank Councillor Ferguson and Councillor Dickman for bringing this to the attention of this City Council. Can I also applaud Unite the Union for the fantastic work they've done to obviously bring to our attention some of the things that are going on in the construction industry. And I know part of the charter is about Get Britain Building, but one of the things I did in preparation for this motion today was just have a quick look at some of the key statistics that the Office for National Statistics compile on the construction industry in the UK. And it's interesting, employment in the construction industry, or construction-related employment, rose by 3.8% in 2017. New work in the industry continues to rise up until 2017, and this is actually the highest level on record. HS2 has also driven a 7.4% increase in new orders within the construction industry. What is concerning is the number of firms going into insolvency within the industry has also grew by 3.4% over this time period, and that represents 2,792 firms, directly impacting on people's jobs and people's livelihood. The number of firms in the industry overall also increased by 6.2%. That's over 300,000 new firms in 2017. And, you know, I'm just reminded of some of the comments that Councillor King made earlier about doing things differently. One of the issues as well within the industry is the trade deficit. So trade deficit in construction materials continues to widen within the United Kingdom. So values of imports are more than double of those that we actually export to the rest of the world. So quite clear, you know, there are significant things happening up and down the country within this industry. And this industry is growing in importance in terms of the economic value it creates for our country, but also the jobs it creates for people within our communities and our neighbourhoods up and down the country. Arguably, we are getting Britain building, and you know, there's an awful lot of work that's happening. And I think in that respect, this couldn't come really at a more important time, when we know lots of people are actually working and trying to make ends meet within this industry. But I have to agree with the nature of the actual charter. This is about improving trade union recognition and their involvement within the construction industry. It's about tackling blacklisting, some awful practices that have plagued this industry for some time. It is about improving safety in the industry. It's about improving mental health. It's also about improving employment standards, decent pay, trade union recognition, which we know this industry has huge challenges with in terms of zero-hour contracts, poor pay, and actually no recognition of trade unions by some of the firms within the construction industry today. So I wholeheartedly support this, but I just wanted to illustrate really, this sits within a context of a growing industry, growing in economic importance within the United Kingdom. You know, it does have some significant challenges in terms of how that industry operates, but I think this charter goes some way towards helping address some of those issues moving forward, so wholeheartedly support this. And from a Greater Manchester point of view, you'll all be familiar. We're doing more building than we've probably ever done, certainly in my lifetime. So I just reiterate, this couldn't come at a more important time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hines.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I certainly support John Ferguson's motion this morning. He made reference to at the end of April when we gathered out there on the and illustrate how many people have died tragically in this industry. But I want to just, because I endorse and echo everything that's been said by previous speakers, but I also want to talk about when we look at buildings, modern buildings, existing buildings for years and years, we glorify them, especially the past buildings. If you go to London or any city in the world, or certainly any city in Britain, and we very rarely consider the people that built them. We consider how wonderful they are, and we never ever think of who built them and what cost they did in their health and the deaths that took place in all those times. I think we should certainly do that. On the charter, I support, because we all know that it's notorious for blacklisting non-union workers and all the rest of it. I'm going back now to 1972 in particular, when people went to prison. Those people were called the Shrewsbury Pickets. And the main argument of those Shrewsbury Pickets in getting recognition for trade unions was not just wages and conditions in that sense, but health and safety. And that really, I'm always arguing that there should be a full inquiry of what went on in those days. The trade unions integral of achieving better conditions, safety conditions, the respect for those people, because if we don't, it's going worse and worse. The City Mayor has just made the comment about how Manchester, Greater Manchester, Salford in particular, is growing. But you know, some of these construction firms are notorious for undercutting, for taking cutting here to saving there, saving the other, and often the effects of that are people that are working on the job. And I think that it's not before time that we do support these people, and today's a chance of doing that. Thank you, Chair.
All those in... Vote's been taken, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Right, the vote's been taken. We now move on to...
Well, then voted on the motion to move to a vote.
Oh, sorry. What? Sorry. Even I could, I'm a clairvoyant. I'm not a clairvoyant, but I can tell you that. Right. All those in favour, show of hands. On the motion. On the motion. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. I would like to waive my right to reply.
Yes.
So we're now voting on the motion. The mover has actually waived his right. All those in favour, show of hands.
Unanimous.
Thank you. Anybody against?
Okay.
No.
So that's it.
Which is out, wasn't it? Item 14.
Yeah, it's the statements of the elected
city. Item 14. Statement to elected city mayor. Contextualised, I hope. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if that's my problem. Okay. Firstly, I'd like to reflect on the tragic and sombre issue which has impacted us all and our fellow citizens across the world. I'm deeply saddened to stand before you today and reflect and pray and think about the 50 victims who have been murdered in the devastating attack on 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, and the 3 people killed in the attack in the city of Utrecht in the Netherlands. Our thoughts and our prayers continue to be with the friends and the family of those that have lost their loved ones and those that have suffered injuries. These are senseless attacks, and we stand united with the people of New Zealand and the Netherlands in these really dark and concerning times. In moving on, I'd like to take the opportunity to also thank Councillor Hunt, Councillor Stone, Councillor Ward, Councillor Dobbs, Councillor Watkins, Councillor Clarkson, Councillor Paul Wilson and Councillor Linley for their hard work and dedication to the people of Salford over the years. There are so many highlights for each of the councillors who have played their part in both serving the people of Salford and transforming the city to what it is today. This is their last full council meeting. I'm sure you'll all join me in wishing them the best for the future in whatever they decide to do. I'd also like to congratulate the winners of the city's first ever Spirit of Salford Awards, the first set of awards for local people who've contributed to our communities across the city in amazing and often selfless ways. Each and every one of those winners, and also those shortlisted, has made an incredible contribution to our city. And it was my privilege to be able to join them in recognition of their achievements at the AJ Bell Stadium on Thursday of last week. They are the spirit of Salford. They are the unsung heroes of this city who tirelessly and often selflessly work for the betterment of the people of this city. To them I owe a deep respect and honour. We've all walked into the town hall this morning to be greeted by a Conservative lobby against the Greater Manchester Plan for Homes, Jobs and the Environment, the redraft Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. And in addition to this, I've acquired a following curious Conservative Party artefact, which has been delivered to Worsley and Boothstown residents. What we have here is a classic example of local Tory misinformation, half-truths and fabrication. The usual fare for the opposition's electioneering campaigns. But I thought that some scrutiny should be applied to just a few of the claims made within their literature. The leaflet claims that the Labour City Mayor and Greater Manchester Mayor want to build on our green fields. It says that the local Conservative councillors have been fighting these and similar proposals over many, many years, and that their most recent opposition was against the 600 homes on the land off Worsley Road. Furthermore, they seem to claim they have single-handedly won the first of two battles and now await a decision in the High Court. I'm also sure that many of our officers in the City Council, especially the planning department, will be bemused to see that Salford's Conservative councillors taking sole credit for the council's opposition to the Peel development on the Broad Oak Farm.
You have one sentence, but then they'll out.
Assistant Mayor referred to single-handed, the leaflet refers to and with residents. That's it, correct?
Sorry, point of order. Point of order. As council,
you to finish it off.
point of order. As Councillor Robin Garrido has not spoken, and as a point of personal explanation refers to a speech he has previously made, could he inform us which speech he is actually referring to that he didn't make?
No. I didn't say you wouldn't be able to say it. I wasn't saying it couldn't be said. All I'm asking was the one line of the sentence, so the monitoring officer can then view whether it's strictly to the regulations.
As Councillor Robin Garrido hasn't spoken in the meeting on this point, then I don't think it can be a point of personal explanation.
Thank you. Nevertheless, the comment has been made. Thanks for the clarity. So it's the Conservative Party councillors and residents. It's not the Labour opposition and Labour councillors in this chamber. It's not the officers of the City Council. It's none of those individuals, is what you've confirmed. That's really useful. So this is opposition which the council, in my opinion, has successfully raised using sound planning arguments against vicious opposition from developers. The reality is that Salford Conservatives have minimal bearing whatsoever on actually fighting developers in the courts. They've put nothing more than a cursory opposition forward on the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework site. And there is no coincidence they raise their issues now with local elections around the corner. They claim to dislike a great many decisions taken by this council, yet they continually fail to raise serious opposition. They have failed for years to provide the people with Salford with an alternative budget. They have failed to provide the public with their own proposals on the Boundary Commission before those proposals had to be submitted. And here they claim to be fighting planning proposals put forward, yet during a period of 3 years, we've barely heard a peep. Council, the fact of the matter is that Salford Conservatives cannot provide serious opposition because they know that more than ever before in local government history, the decisions made by local councils are bound by the policies of their government. Endless cuts, disempowerment, obfuscation, language games and confusion. This is the norm of a Tory government. But whereas the Salford Conservatives have been busy attempting to justify their existence to our voters in the city, what they don't tell the public in their leaflet is that Salford Labour has been battling with the Conservative national government over its prescriptive national planning policy framework for a great many years. It is the national planning policy framework which places viability over suitability of development and prevents our council acquiring its fair share of contributions to infrastructure from would-be developers. It's the national planning policy framework which enforces our local objectively assessed housing need target in the city of Salford. The same objectively assessed target somehow balances out at 300 housing units per year by the mid-2020s, to enable the Conservative Party to meet their own seemingly arbitrary manifesto target on housing. It is the Conservative government who have told the Greater Manchester Combined Authority that our housing deal from government, which as many of you in this chamber know, includes an £8 million source of revenue and a £50 million land fund. I do actually have copies of the deal here we've been trying to negotiate with the Conservative government for your information, to enable us to prioritise brownfield first development. Well, what they tell us is it's contingent. It's contingent on us providing 227,200 homes in Greater Manchester between 2016-17 and 2034-35, and an accelerated delivery rate of 12,375 homes per annum up until 2026. None of this information is in the artefact, is in the leaflet that is going to homes in Worsley and Boothstown. It's an omission of what is actually happening in reality. And it is the Conservative government who, when faced with downsized estimates of housing need using the 2016 subnational housing projections from the Office of National Statistics last year, told us not to use the latest projections and to use the previous 2014 subnational housing projections, which interestingly to everyone in this chamber end up delivering a higher number in terms of the objectively assessed housing needs. Come on, tell the people of Salford and Greater Manchester the truth about what is actually happening in reality. And whilst the Conservative government has been chopping and changing the rules, as has happened an awful lot over the past years, it's been myself and Mayor Andy Burnham making representations on behalf of Salford and Greater Manchester residents, not the local Tory group and opposition. So let's talk seriously about the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework and Salford's local plan. When Andy Burnham promised a radical rewrite in May, the issue wasn't just about Greenbelt, although what we've actually delivered, as you all know, is a greater than 50% reduction in the Greenbelt in the latest draft of the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. This was actually about getting the right homes into the right places across Greater Manchester, making sure that the strategy tied together with our other priorities in Greater Manchester, ensuring tenure mix, employment opportunities, ecological friendly development for the people of Greater Manchester. Greater Manchester is faced with numerous opportunities and challenges over coming decades. A lot of that is as a consequence of Tory austerity and cuts in local government, I might add. And it's those challenges that the GMSF sets out to tackle. We've got a rapidly growing economy, and with that, a rapidly growing population. There are new people coming into Greater Manchester who need places to live. There are people living with families in Greater Manchester who want to get onto the housing ladder. So that demand for accommodation doesn't just simply push prices to an unsustainable level by us not building. This phenomena takes place within a context of a nationwide housing crisis, a crisis even acknowledged by the Conservative government in their own white paper, where for many years not enough homes have been built to keep pace with demand in the United Kingdom. This is the product of a failed housing policy nationally, which has seen local authorities and the public sector squeezed out of its once huge role in the delivery of homes up and down this country. But the long and short of it is, even with our current rates of growth, there aren't currently the numbers of houses we need to keep a roof over everyone's head here in Greater Manchester, with 97,000 people on our housing waiting lists across the 10 Greater Manchester local authorities. And in addition to this, our residents are going to need to travel around the city region. And to do so, we'll need to make the most of our transport infrastructure, trains, trams, buses. But our current stock will not be enough to cater for everyone. And the major improvements will be needed to ensure that Greater Manchester isn't faced with gridlock in the future. Government has given us a housing target. You'll know what that is, 201,000 homes. And then there's an 8.6% buffer because of our over-reliance on high-density housing in the urban core of the city region. Apartments, flats, high-rise living. This is a number that currently is non-negotiable. It's a number that must be met using the government's own methodology to calculate our objectively assessed housing need. And if we don't do that, all of our local plans could be faced with legal jeopardy, and local authorities could be faced with planning by appeal. Not only will that cost us dearly as a local authority, already struggling financially, having lost £211 million by the end of this next financial year since 2010, but it would also lead to potentially homes being built absolutely anywhere in Greater Manchester, and that includes on our much loved Greenbelt. And in the midst of all this development, we must also keep existing residents' interests and concerns for their local communities, their geography and their lifestyle central to our considerations within the spatial framework. The culmination of the efforts sees a Greater Manchester spatial framework that far better balances the lives of current residents against the demands of Greater Manchester to grow, to provide new employment and residential development space, and upgrade our infrastructure. It is the extension of a conversation based on over 27,000 responses to the first draft of the spatial framework, as well as an extensive discussion with elected members, experts, planners, and other interested parties across Greater Manchester. The current draft is fully integrated with a housing vision document, a precursor for a housing strategy in Greater Manchester to be published later on this year. That means the kind of accommodation as well as the numbers are taken into consideration. The GMSF, as you know, has promised an additional 50,000 affordable homes over the lifetime of the plan. That's a significant chunk of the total 201,000 extra units. But also, what we're doing is committing to 30,000 of those 50,000 being social rented properties, truly affordable housing within Greater Manchester. It also combines with our infrastructure framework, with pains taken to reduce the loss of Greenbelt by prioritising higher density housing clustered around transport infrastructure and the urban core of the city region. That is combined with our town centre challenges, regeneration strategies for high streets and town centres across Greater Manchester, bringing life back into our towns, commitments to carbon neutrality by 2038, net zero carbon homes by 2028, a planning presumption against fracking contained within the spatial framework, out of kilter with what is specified in the government's own national planning policy framework. providing much needed safeguards against the freewheeling destruction of our environment and safeguards for the future of the people of Greater Manchester. And the new plan also provides a strategic overview and analysis of our key green infrastructure, parks, cycling paths, walking, off the back of an already announced commitment to invest £160 million in cycling and walking over the next 4 years across Greater Manchester. In every sense, we have seen an improvement to the original offer to the public and the residents of Greater Manchester, established through an evidence-based approach to delivering planning within Greater Manchester. And within the tight regulatory framework provided by the Tories, your representatives, council officers here and across Greater Manchester have simply jumped backflips and somersaults to provide the best possible deal for Greater Manchester. Our infrastructure, as many of us know, is crumbling. We need to get the right amount of investment to realise our ambitions here in Greater Manchester. Investment that all of us know is really difficult to come by because it relies on central government decision making. The Tories in Stockport, in Trafford and Bolton are now campaigning to remove themselves from the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework to protect their green belt. A movement which would interestingly see those areas having to actually build more homes than they've currently been allocated. And in their opportunistic attempts to score cheap points in many respects against Labour in the run-up to the local elections, the Tories are leading their own voters down a blind path. And that's a familiar story when we look at what's happening nationally. Following Speaker John Bercow's decision not to allow a third meaningful vote on Theresa May's Brexit deal, we are facing unprecedented uncertainty over the future of this country under a Conservative government. And despite promises to end austerity, the government is offering absolutely nothing to the people of this city. Nothing that is other than Brexit bribes to our MPs to convince them to back her shambolic negotiations. A few weeks ago, the nation was appalled at the offer made by the Chancellor Philip Hammond, the Stronger Towns Fund, to pay off Northern MPs to vote for them in the chamber. The amount was a paltry 1.6 billion to last until 2026, with 320 million of that to go to the West Midlands to shore up the Tory Metro Mayor's support for Andy Street. This was a bribe from its conception all the way through to its delivery. This government does nothing other than deliver cash to friends of the Conservatives to keep themselves in power. This is the shocking mentality of our governing party today. Thank you very much.
You've got 15 minutes allowed for questions. You've got 3 so far.
We've got 15 minutes allocated for questions, and I have got
5 now.
5 people. Okay, it's Councillor Clark first, then Councillor Ord.
No, it's Councillor Lindley.
Oh, sorry, I thought. Councillor Lindley first.
Right, I apologise.
Thank you, Chair. As I stand here on my last meeting of Council, something that comes as a relief to me as much as I'm sure it does to some of the members opposite, I've found myself thinking about what this chamber looked like in my first meeting as a 21-year-old 15 years ago back in 2004. And in many ways, things have changed much for the better. This chamber much more represents the people of Salford now than it did 15 years ago. There are more young people, there are more women, there are ethnic minority councillors, and I don't think there were any in 2004 when I stepped onto the council. But ironically, this council chamber has, in my view, never been more intolerant of dissent of opinion in my 15 years on here. Now, I've never objected to debate. I've never stood away from a debate. I've always been an active and willing and smiling participant in some political back and forth. And I never expected anyone in this chamber, sometimes even on my own side, to agree with me. But I hope I've always taken back as much as I've given, that I've always been prepared to take the criticism if I've stood up and given my opinion, that there has been at least a mutual disrespect, if not a mutual respect. And I think we've got away from that in this chamber now, that we have a culture where people are prepared to give out criticism but are horrified at the thought of receiving it back. We have lost our ability to disagree honourably, to think that someone is wrong, but to think that they are wrong with good intentions. And that's not unique to this council chamber, that is entirely reflective of where we are politically, nationally at the moment. That we have a whole host of people who are prepared to stand up and argue that things are black and white, when the truth is that they are many shades of grey. We have people who are prepared to stand up and tell us that things are easy when they are difficult and complicated. And whilst I do think that Jeremy Corbyn is one of the worst advocates of that approach, I know that he is by no means the only one, and I am very conscious of the people within my own party who are also guilty of that approach. I sleep well at night knowing that Corbyn and Trump and Farage and Jacob Rees-Mogg all have far more in common with each other than they do with me, and that makes me feel a lot better. I think, whatever our disagreements, that we have lost a large amount of common decency in this chamber. I won't be around to see it. I step down on the 2nd of May. I can see some of the blank looks and the rolled eyes and the people sinking into their chairs at the worst excesses of debate in this chamber, and I hope that those people who are still there after May and feel the same will take back control. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lindley. Councillor Horde.
Council, I wish to bring to your attention a matter of such seriousness that only an external investigation will suffice. The issue of the planning permission refusals for the Crescent Police Station is likely to turn out to be one of the local government scandals of the decade. I did not attend the applications hearing as I was very ill at the time. I sent a letter of support, but I had no concerns as it was a high quality scheme. I thought its passing was a foregone conclusion. Its refusal was therefore a great surprise. I undertook all of the avenues the leadership have disingenuously suggested recently. I asked Chris Finlay how we could get this application back on track. He told me, Steve, I think a political decision has already been made. I was asked about my supporting statement by a resident who said that Councillor Mashter had said I wasn't very supportive of the application. I raised this with Councillor Mashter, who disputed this with a plausible denial. I spoke to Councillor Antrobus, whose response was less than reassuring. I had a meeting with City Mayor Dennett and Deputy Mayor Councillor Merry. I was promised they would have a meeting with the relevant officers the following week. I spoke to each of them a fortnight later. Separately, both of them said, when asked, no, I haven't done anything. I knew then that something was wrong was taking place. I'd met with the applicants who had told me much more. I spoke about this with every backbencher who would listen. And then one day, one councillor told me they were on that panel. They had been telephoned by Councillor Mashter before the meeting, who told them these applicants are not real developers. They want to make some quick money by flipping the site after getting permission in an attempt to sway the vote. However, this left me no further forward. Knowing what vile bullies this mob are, who I had previously described as a Unite Mafia, this councillor did not want to come forward and face being targeted themselves. At this point, I went to Miranda Carruthers-Watt. I said to her, I would like to meet with you. Excuse me, it's just moved. I would like to meet with you as I need advice on issues that may amount to a planning fraud, an electoral fraud, and general deviancy within the Cabinet. She told me she was too busy and that she would be in touch. That conversation...
Has made several accusations against officers and members, including electoral fraud. I heard the word. Standing Order 24.2, it says, if a member behaves improperly or offensively or deliberately obstructs business, the chair may direct the member to be silent. Further standing orders talk about breaches of the code of conduct within this chamber. Can I ask you to rule whether Councillor Ord's speech in terms of making accusations of that nature without apparently asking for these to be investigated is in order?
We're adjourning the meeting for 1 minute while it's discussed by the relevant officers. Thank you.
So, Council, just let me just clarify where we are with that. As the member has mentioned something about the monitoring officer, I'm going to reply. I don't feel that the member's behaving improperly at the moment, but I will refer the member to the general Code of Conduct, which is page 301 of the Constitution. And section 3 talks about a member not being abusive to any person, do anything which will knowingly cause the council to breach the Equality Act, or intimidate or attempt to intimidate a person who is likely to be a complainant or witness involved in the administration of any investigations or proceedings in relation to an allegation that a member has failed to comply with his or her authority's code of conduct, or do anything which compromises or is likely to compromise the impartiality of those who work for or on behalf of the council. So 3.2 talks about members must not disclose information given to you in confidence by anyone or information acquired by you which you believe or ought to reasonably be aware of is confidential nature, except where, and there are 3 or 4 points. So I will allow Councillor Rowe to continue, but I will remind you of those general obligations of the Code of Conduct.
I don't believe a single item that you've just listed out applies to what I've just said. I've tried every avenue possible other than putting it in writing, and I put other written complaints in with no response. But let me carry on. The conversation with Miranda took place before the LGA meeting with the scrutiny chairs. That is how long ago it took place. To date, I have received no follow-up from her. Since then, I have listened to an audio recording of that planning meeting. In this, Councillor Master makes up a false statement that he attributes to me, and my support and views were not relayed to panel members. But last month, an important development occurred. My councillor witness now feels able to tell the truth about what happened when they are questioned during an investigation. Do not underestimate the predicament this stale establishment of group thinkers has got us in. There is a multi-million-pound lawsuit being compiled as I speak, and there is no doubt in my mind that criminal offences have been committed. Now perhaps you understand why I've chosen to retire. I simply can't save the people of Salford whilst bound and gagged by this dysfunctional Labour group. This and multiple other issues has caused me no end of suffering and destroyed both my mental and physical health. For half of my current term of office, I slept up to 20 hours a day and left wondering which beam I should hang myself from. I put on 6 stone in weight, which I've since lost. I was not offered any help or support by the so-called socialists at any time. The only person who provided any help was Kate Lewis, who was Chief Whip, had the unenviable position of talking to a very ill man. If one positive has come out of this, someone who was once a stranger is now a great friend. But your continued and prolonged unacceptable treatment of backbenchers has to stop. We simply can't afford to lose great councillors like Paul Wilson. Kind of politics has dated just as well as strong and stable.
Councillor Hines. Thank you, Chair. I just want to comment on the City Mayor's opening statement about the tragedy in New Zealand. We talk in this chamber on many, many issues. Some of them, to certain people, more important than others. All of them, though, perhaps important, whether it's be the crisis in the economy, whether it's the environment, whether it's social services, the health service, criminality, you name it. But quite frankly, at the minute, and I'm not saying that everybody would have this opinion that I have today, at the moment, the thing that's really, really hurting me is the issues about racism throughout, not just this country, but throughout the world. I think it's an absolutely terrible state that we live in. Because while that goes on, we're never even going to start to get off the front line on tackling all the other issues that are so important. Yes, racism, you could argue, has been around for centuries. Often because of ignorance, often because of hatred. On many occasions,
because the establishments of the world at that time have used it as a divide and rule. And it blames immigrants or peoples of not the indigenous populations or anything else to really divide those people for the establishment's own position. It's got to stop. And the only way it will stop is for people standing up and fighting it. At the moment, there is a real danger. And we talk about democracy, and I could have a debate on what is real democracy and what isn't, if it's just a word. But really, the gates are opening for the extreme right to come in and really take advantage. And really, from an economic position, I would argue, many disagree. The neoliberalism that we've had in this last 40 years has left so many people behind throughout the world, not just in this country, but certainly in this country. And when they be surprised then that the right wing takes advantage of that, it's got to stop, Ben. It's got to stop. And really, the awakening really was last Saturday in New Zealand. And as the Mayor said, followed on, and it follows on and follows on. People are people. We've all got to join together. We've all got to respect them as people. Colour of the skin, the language they speak, or whatever else. It's people of the world that's important. And therefore, you know, I really feel there's a lot today, and I have done for a number of weeks, as I've seen the right, the extreme right, taking advantage of very, very vulnerable people in many occasions. It's got to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Now somebody needs to move an extension, otherwise the meeting of the Constitution. All those in favour say aye. Anybody against? No. Thank you. Yes. It's been muted. Can we move to presentations at this stage? Because I think a lot of people put a lot of their lives on hold, and I think we should move to the presentations, which is
Item 20.
Item 20. We'll go back to the debate, but these people have put a lot in their lives, some for many, many years, regardless of party, and I think this is a debate. I'm not going to say further on that. Right. So we'll now start the presentations. Are you going over there? Yeah, going over there. First person is Councillor Lindley. You've got 1 minute.
Thank you, thank you, Chair. I think I said a little bit of my piece before. I didn't want to be so churlish at this stage. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's helped and supported me over the last 15 years, particularly my Conservative ward colleagues Les and Nikki and David, and also thank you to Richard and Laura and to the late Stan Wachowski for all our differences. I think we always tried to work civilly for the benefit of people in Walkden. It's an enormous honour to be the representative for your hometown. It's been a really great privilege to do that for the last 15 years. I think it's the right time to move on and try something different, but I will always hold those 15 years close to my heart. I've enjoyed every single minute of it. Thank you very much.
Councillor Clarkson.
Thank you very much. I'm reliably informed I've only got 1 minute, so Mr. Mayor, watch and learn. This is how you give a brief speech. I just want to say I am very sad to be leaving this chamber, but I'm incredibly grateful for the past 8 years. It's been a wonderful experience to just make some small difference for somebody in this city. I absolutely adore this city, and I've really enjoyed being on this council. I think this meeting's actually typified my council experience. We've had points of order on points of personal explanation, pauses for legal advice, and a debate about commas. And I am going to miss that terribly. I'm also going to miss a lot of you terribly as well. You will have an advocate and a cheerleader outside the council for the good work that you do. You don't have to share somebody's politics to know their intentions are good. Thank you so much for the past 8 years.
Councillor Holmes. Oh, sorry. Yeah. This is well done. And Chris Mason's top all she worked for. I'm sure we'll see you now. Okay, thank you for this. Okay.
Right. Put them there. Right, thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to say thank you to everybody concerned for today's gift. I'm not feeling too well at the moment, there's no doubt you can see, but there's a couple of things I'd like to share with you. There's a lot of things I'd like to share with you, but I'll be here for about half an hour, you know. And I'm not going to crack the jokes about the Lemoncello or David or anything like that, you know what I mean. But I'd like to share one thing with you, and that is, I came on the council in 1991, together with Councillor Ormisham, Councillor Margaret Morris, Councillor Bernard Murphy, and Councillor Dougie Daniels. One thing that comes to mind is my claim to fame. It was when I came on the council, I first went on the Education Committee and the Arts and Leisure Committee, which the Education Committee also consisted of the School Subs Committee. And it was a Wednesday morning, and it was a School Subs Committee visiting a school, I can't remember, I think it was in Walkden. And the coach turned up, and I got on the coach, and there was only me there, and the education officer at the time, who I can't recollect his name. Anyway, the coach sets off, and everybody's waving at us. There's only me and the education officer on the bus, and everybody's waving at us and going like this. You know, so I'm thinking, and I'm waving back, you know, I thought, he must know me, you know what I mean? I'm waving back, you know. So we get to the school, and gets off the coach, and I said to the driver, I said, what's everybody waving at? He said, oh, this is the Manchester United tour bus. And that was my first claim to fame on the council. And I've been on the council chair. I've made some great friends, both on the opposition parties, and even Norman Owen's a good friend of mine at the moment, you know, which is a good thing to say. And I hope that friendship doesn't stop just because I'm not here. You know, I hope people still keep in touch with me. And I'd like to thank my fellow 5 councillors who have been absolutely fantastic all the years that I have been on the council. And we always have one motto in Cadishead and Earlham. The 6 councillors, kick one, the other 5 limp. So I'd like to thank you all very much for your friendship and hospitality over the last couple of years. It's been nearly 30 years that I've been on the council. Okay, so I've had to keep it short and sweet, so thank you very much.
Councillor Dobbs. Congratulations.
No, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll see each other around.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Dear Chair, City Mayor, members of the Council, officers. I think it was Councillor Turner, who said in January, it's an honour and a privilege to serve as a City Councillor. It's been a huge privilege and honour to serve the residents of this great city, but most all the community of Odsall for the last 19 years. I hope you all believe I leave this Odsall ward in a better place than I was first elected in May 2000, and I'm proud of that. This couldn't have been achieved without working in partnership with the community, fellow councillors and obviously officers. Members of the council, I respect each and every one of you. We don't always agree, nor should we, but I'm in no doubt that you're all here to make a positive difference. I know we are going through difficult times, budget cuts and political turmoil nationally, but putting our city first before politics should unite us and make Salford even a greater place. Stand together in honour and strength. Be bold and positive. Colleagues, I wish you all the very best for the future, and I will champion Odsall and the great city of Salford always. Many thanks again, and as I say in my business, that's a wrap for me. Thank you.
Councillor Stone. I'm sure you'll have plenty to do.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. It feels really strange to be standing here speaking in my very last council meeting. Many of you know I got involved in politics because I was a victim of crime at home, which led me to set up a residents group, a home watch group, and the more I got involved, the more I realised actually I could make a difference and I wanted to be a part of the decision-making process. I'll never forget the early times working with Rick Critchley, Paul Dennett, being those gobby residents arguing with the then leader and deputy leader John Merry and Dave Lancaster. It's quite interesting to look at the journey that I've been on over the last sort of 9 or 10 years. I think being robbed actually was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me, which is strange, but that's what led me to be here. It led me to end up standing as a councillor, one of the proudest moments I've had, taking what was a Tory seat with almost double the votes of the sitting councillor. The work, the effort of all of my friends, my colleagues, the residents, it was just fantastic. I'm really proud of what our little residents group sort of achieved. Rick being councillor, you know, taking Walkden South, retaining it, Paul being the city mayor. You've always been an inspiration, Paul. I love you to bits and I think you're doing a fantastic job, so carry on. Really grateful for all the opportunities I've had, being Assistant Mayor for Communication and Engagement, being promoted to Lead Member for Health and Wellbeing when Jacob was only a few months old, and obviously more recently as Lead Member for Children and Young People. Obviously I need to say a particular thank you to my husband Johnny, who supported me every step of the way. I also need to thank my beautiful boy Jacob, who's been fantastic. Yeah, he's been fantastic. The way that he's been welcomed into the council has just been fantastic, so I really do appreciate that. He's already said you're going to miss it, haven't you? So yeah, I've been really sort of thrived in the role. I have found it very difficult though with the government cuts. You know, losing 53% of the budget has had a massive impact, and I don't think people realise the sort of really difficult decisions we've had to make. I'm really proud of Children's Services. I think I've got so much respect for Kathy, Charlotte, Debbie and Sharon, and the fact that we managed to retain our good status with the recent Ofsted inspection is a real credit to every single member of staff. Too many people to mention by name, but Jim, you've got a fantastic team here. Thanks to basically everybody who has helped me, advised me, supported me, put up with me, questioning and challenging over the last 8 years. I'm sure you know who you are. Obviously, thanks to John Walsh, who's been my support member for the last few years. Couldn't have done it without you, mate. And thanks for the chauffeuring around. And finally, just kind of really wanted to say it'd be remiss not to use this very final opportunity to urge the Salford Conservatives to stand with the City Mayor and lobby the government on behalf of Salford's, on behalf of Salford people. I know that you know our services. I know that you can see the impact that austerity and welfare reform's having in the city, and I really want you to show some integrity and courage and stand up for Salford like we deserve. Please lobby your government, work with Paul, and be the voice that Salford needs. You know, just saying I'm just a councillor, it's not good enough. You've got the opportunity, but you've got the responsibility to work on Salford's behalf. So, you know, please do that, because I think if we can do that united front, we've got a bigger chance of sort of lobbying government and getting the funding that Salford deserves. Thank you.
Councillor Watkins. That's it. Okay. Who told you and didn't want a presentation?
No, I said I didn't. I didn't want anything.
No, fine. That's it.
I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank everyone who's put any work in it with good intent and with this council. There's a lot of fantastic backbenchers here. There's a lot of fantastic opposition. You know, the work you've done, especially in scrutiny, has been really good. I'd like to take this point to apologise for failing when I've been ill, especially with casework with residents, things like that. For those A-listers on the Labour backbenchers, don't shoot the messenger. You know, deal with the problems we've got. And finally, I'd like to thank my wife, because without her, in a different time, a different place, I have no doubt I'd be homeless or dead.
Thank you. Thank you. We now are still on item 14, 15 questions or comments. There are 4 speakers at the moment. Yes.
It's okay, we
Councillor Merry was just indicating, we've got him on the list. So.
Oh, yeah, you are on the list. Councillor Robin Guido.
First of all, I'll have to do this very quick because I've got a few other things to say, but can I just align myself with the comments made by Councillor Hines? Every word of it I believe, and we must fight against everything that's happening. Just make it very clear that we're talking about the extreme right and the fascists, and these are the people that we must defeat at all costs. So I'll just leave it at that. I've been on the council in total for 19 years. So a little bit longer than the city mayor, whose memory probably doesn't go back to 19 years ago. But when I was elected in 1975 for a ward called Linnishall Central, it was a seat held nearly always by Liberals or Socialists, and I was told I would never win it. I fought that seat on virtually one issue, and that issue was to try and prevent houses being built on Linnishall, Moss and Sandmill, which is Greenbelt. Yeah. And I spent the whole of the time immediately after my election at the public inquiry fighting against that development. Right? It took 3 years for the then government to make a decision, but we won. So that's part of my credentials. I just wanted to make that very clear that I've not just got on the bandwagon in the last year or two, I've been on that bandwagon for at least 19 years. Now, just moving, I'm not going to get involved in any rants at this stage. I just want to clear up a few points that you've made, and without getting too excited about it. First of all, the leaflet you quoted for was delivered to Worsley Ward. It was not an election leaflet, therefore did not contain any policies. It's a newsletter, does not mention the word election in any part of that leaflet. It is purely a newsletter giving people information prior to any election campaign starting. So let's get that right. But truth very often does hurt. You said in your speech about members not responding to the GMSF. Again, another inaccuracy, or in fact untruth. I have responded, not online. I sent a 5-page response by email, which in fact went to something like 4 o'clock on Monday morning, well before the deadline, setting out all the reasons why I felt that certain parts of that GMSF should be opposed. I'm quite happy to circulate that to all councillors, as I know some of my colleagues will, who have also sent responses. So let's be quite clear about that. And also I will be responding, in fact it's already typed up, about the local plan. How much does Labour care about our green belt? Well, let's look back to the last 3 public inquiries I've been involved in. And the first of that was to do with the racecourse at Worsley, which the Conservatives, along with hundreds, if not thousands of local residents, fought and won. But at that public inquiry, not one Labour councillor, not one known Labour member attended that inquiry or gave evidence at it. So that's Labour's record. That's the first of the 3 public inquiries.
Point of order.
The last 2...
Order 24.2. Is it in order for Councillor Garrido to severely mislead the council? Should he not have mentioned that it was the Labour council that turned down that application?
Sorry, I've not finished speaking yet.
I'm not finished speaking yet.
Well,
sorry.
I'm not finished speaking yet.
No, how many more accuracies is it on?
This is a ruling. I mean, have I said something I shouldn't have done?
When it's finished,
come back. Yes.
But you're going to tell them that they turned it down.
Yes, I'm sure, in fact, I mean, if we go back to the Linnishall one, of course, the Labour Council were in favour of that one. In terms of the racecourse, I'm quite happy to confirm that the council actually turned it down. You know, but I'm talking about where we had to put up a lot of arguments, a lot of opposition in front of an inspector who then had to report to the Secretary of State. That inspector hadn't heard from the ruling group of the council. He reported on what was said at that public inquiry. That was the important place to make those points. So if we move again onto the Broad Oak inquiry, there were 2 inquiries, and in fact there was one Labour councillor who we asked if he would come and speak because his ward adjoined part of the site, Duke's Meadows, and that was Councillor Peter Wheeler. And he very kindly did agree to come and speak, and we've recognised that previously, and we have thanked Peter for that. And he came one day to the public inquiry and he spoke. But that is the only support we've received from Labour councillors at those 2 public inquiries. So I think we need to make that very, very, very clear. I think it's interesting that the Labour leaflet that's been put out, just a week, I think, before we put our leaflet out, did not mention one single word about the GMSF. Not one single word. That shows you how much Labour cares about protecting our green belt. Not one single word that was mentioned. And I'll just make one final point, because our time is running out. I've got a number to make, but just one final point. And that is that as far as Salford goes, we are being treated unfairly. Salford, along with Manchester, are being asked to take the highest percentage of homes to be built. That is unfair. What about all the other district councils, if it comes to that? We are being treated unfairly, and it's right for us to oppose that.
Councillor Kelly spoke at the first one.
I've just reminded in fact also Councillor Kelly came to the first inquiry at Broad Oak. So I'll include that as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Antrobus.
Councillor Antrobus.
Angry and upset when I hear the opposition trying to claim all the credit for every victory on planning terms that this city council has, when in fact all they're doing is shouting from the sidelines, because I'm sorry, but the truth is, it's been decisions, legal decisions by the Labour Council, Labour-controlled council, that has led to some of our successes. And one of the things that angers me most is that they never stand up and give credit to Ben Walsworth. It was Ben Walsworth who got through this council the Worsley Greenway policy, the policy which actually protects the areas that they are concerned about, including the Broad Oak application. And I think that it was Ben, I was there with him as his deputy at the time. It was Ben who came up with the idea of the Greenway and instructed the officers to bring it forward. And that was because Ben and I actually visited the sites with officers, and we said from the very start that this was such a great resource for the people of the whole of that part of the city, running straight through from Wartney to Eccles, that it deserved to be protected. And I think that there should be some acknowledgement of the work that Ben Walsworth did on that, and his great vision. Now, on the Broad Oak issue, I hadn't seen the leaflet. It's probably a good job, because I would have even been more fired up than I have been. But not only was that site protected by the policy that Ben Walsworth introduced and adopted by a Labour council, but this Labour council employed the top planning lawyer in the country in order to defend the council's position. When the opposition say, oh, the council weren't represented there, Labour weren't interested, we were actually represented there by the top lawyer in the country, the most expensive lawyer in the country as well. And, you know, that took a lot of courage to make that decision, given the austerity that we face. And it was the work of our officers, the arguments that they put forward, if you read the inspector's report, that actually weighed heavily in the balance of the inspector's decision. And anyone who reads the inspector's decision will understand. And I'm sorry, Councillor Mrs Garrido is shaking her head, saying, no way. I think that's a great discourtesy to the officers who served this city council so well, and she ought to be ashamed of that. Now, what is the threat to places like Broadoak? Well, I've been on the council a long time, and I actually remember some of Councillor Lindley's statements from before the general election that brought David Cameron. I remember him coming forward and praising this great new policy that the Tories were going to bring in after the election. I think it was called something like open source planning. Was that the policy? And we're going to get rid of all the bureaucracy of planning. We're going to take powers away from planning authorities. And Councillor Garrido used to cheer and clap. The dirty secret behind that policy was, yeah, they were going to take powers away from local planning authorities and hand it over to developers like Peel, their friends, the people who are making the profits, the people that their party supports. So the reality is the greatest threat to those areas is the policies that they used to cheer on time after time in this council chamber. And even now, there is a legal challenge. And what is the basis of that legal challenge by Peel? Is it because they think that our policies are wrong? Is it because they think we have got the wrong information? No, it's because they say that the decision does not comply with the National Planning Policy Framework, the policy that enshrines the open source planning that they used to rave about in this chamber. And can I just end up by making one simple statement, a statement of fact. For all Councillor Garrido's bluster about the Greenbelt, we are the only authority in Greater Manchester which, as a result of the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, will see a net increase in the amount of Greenbelt, and most of that is actually in Worsley.
Councillor Murray.
If I might say so, the Chief Executive has set the bar quite high in terms of offensive comments and so forth, so I presume I'll be extended the same courtesy as was later. And I'm actually a defender of free speech, and I listened very carefully to what Councillor Lindley said, and I wish him all the best for the future, and to say that, in my opinion, he's only been wrong 90% of the time rather than 100% of the time. And the fact remains that I think he is right, that we should actually sort of aspire to a higher range of debate in this chamber, and to make sure that we don't get into personal comments. Which is why, if I may say so, I did find Councillor Ord's speech a bit disappointing. And I'm not going to go down into the gutter with him, but I am going to say a few facts. When I was disappointed when he made allegations, the two allegations which I would have thought the Chief Executive might have picked up on. One is he made an allegation of electoral fraud without actually putting forward any substantial evidence to actually justify that particular statement. And I don't think people should actually put forward smears in this council chamber without providing any evidence. He's entitled to say it, but he should provide the evidence to do so. And if he hasn't got the evidence, he should have withdrawn and apologised. And the second thing, which I was particularly appalled by, and as people know, I'm not always a defender of officers in terms of what they say. I think they can look after themselves. But I am outraged by the attack on the integrity of the officers. And I was particularly disappointed that Councillor Garrido applauded him, actually, in terms of making that particular allegation of criminal activity. If he is saying that the planning committee engaged in criminal activity colluded with by officers, right, then I think that's an insult not just to the Labour members of that committee, that's an insult to the Conservative members of that committee. And I'm able to say that because I'm not a member of the Planning Committee, nor have I taken any part in discussions about this particular application. So in all that basis, I think that, you know, we need to move on, right? Councillor Watson's done a lot of work for his particular ward, and I will pay tribute to that. And I will understand some of the problems that he's been experiencing. But it's not appropriate to behave in that particular manner. Some of you as students of history may remember a Senator McCarthy who existed in America, actually. He used to wave a piece of paper around saying, I've got a list of members of the Communist Party who happen to be working for the government. No one ever saw that list, but it was a means of smearing people of the government. If a particular attack is going to be taking place without evidence, right, then I think we should be careful and restrained. I've always sought to play the ball, not the man, in this particular chamber, and I intend to keep on doing so. And I'm not going to descend down into trading insults with anybody. What I'm going to do is to plead with you all that when we put forward arguments, as we just heard now, this is a robust debate and evidence takes place and people submit arguments on their favour, that we keep the arguments at that level and not engage in the sort of level of personal abuse, particularly of officers who can't answer back in this chamber. And I'd urge everybody to remember that.
Points of personal explanation.
So,
you are entitled.
well, in which case I'm entitled to answer it.
One sentence first, and then the officers will discuss.
Lord.
I don't know how I can be criticised for not providing the evidence when I've tried as many steps as I possibly can. I look forward for a full independent inquiry and I will provide all the evidence at that time. And when that's done, I'll be looking forward to an apology from Councillor Merry.
So I would just like to say that the Deputy Monitor Officer has contacted Councillor Ord with a request for a meeting and this evidence, and I personally will look forward to receiving that evidence and will take that forward.
Mr. Mayor, if I can just be permitted to continue my speech here, the personal explanation is an interruption of a speech, actually. The point. No, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, then you had no right to make the point of personal explanation, because... Right. Right, thank you, because if that was a trick to try and catch me out, it hasn't worked, because the fact remains that I actually commend what the Chief Executive has said. We don't just mount an independent inquiry because people ask for it. Provide the evidence, and if that evidence justifies it, then we'll consider the appropriate action. But so far, I haven't heard a single allegation within this chamber other than an allegation, oh, there's been criminal activity, which applies to the whole of the Planning Committee, including Conservative members, implies that the chair of the committee was acting in some way corruptly, implies that the officers were acting corruptly, and I actually take exception. I believe in justice. That's why I joined the Labour Party. I believe that people are entitled to be defended when they're attacked unjustly. And I'm sorry, I will not accept an unjust attack being made on people without evidence being supplied. I'm urged Councillor Ord to supply the evidence to the Deputy Monitoring Officer, and we'll take it from there.
Councillor King.
And the City Mayor's fine speech that I could touch on, but I want to home in particularly on the issue that the Mayor touched on in the beginning of his speech about the awful events in Christchurch and how the extreme right are aiming to divide us Democrats, and as someone once said, we have more in common than divides us. I just want to take us back to a multicultural event Councillor Heather Fletcher and I attended Sunday before last. It was St Patrick's Day Parade in Manchester. And it was led by Councillor Fletcher, who is Jewish, and myself, who are nominally Christian, and quite a number of Muslim councillors from the Manchester area. And immediately after that, all of us took a taxi and we attended a Jewish Representative Council educational event in, I nearly said St David's School, in King David's School. The City Mayor was there, including several other councillors from this City Chamber. And I think that we should have more of these cross-cultural, cross-racial events, because we need to learn more about what divides us and not allow the extreme right to begin to divide us in a nasty way. And I think this is something that we need to be more conscious of. That was an excellent event. It was educational, and I would like to see more, for example, from the Muslim community. I represent a constituency with a significant Jewish community and a significant Muslim community. In fact, my ward is extremely well represented by Jewish representatives and Jewish community and so on. For the past 30 years, I've represented that Jewish community, the same as anybody else in my particular ward. The extreme right, unfortunately, they are about, and not just in the UK, but indeed across Europe, and they are connecting themselves in the deep web and various other places. And we as a city council and as leaders of our community must not allow those people to divide. And I would say that as Democrats, there's more that unites us than divides us, and let's remember that as we leave here today. And thank you to those councillors who are standing down for the excellent work we've done over the past number of years in the City Council. Thank you, Chair.
City Mayor to respond, please.
Okay, firstly, in responding to Councillor Linley and all the colleagues who've obviously presented today, to thank them for their work really and their commitment to the city. I don't necessarily agree with some of the comments that Councillor Linley made about dissent and intolerance and us not tolerating difference in this chamber. And the reason why I don't necessarily agree with him is because we find ourselves, in my opinion, in unprecedented circumstances. You know, since 2010, you'll be aware that funding from central government has been cut by over 50% in terms of the revenue support grant. 211 million by the end of this financial year will have been taken out of this city council's budget. That creates really challenging circumstances, and inevitably that leads to differences of how we see the world, differences of how we think we need to resolve and respond to the crisis that is before us. Like yourself, I don't always see things in black and white ways, and I also don't necessarily think that it's difficulty versus complicatedness. You know, for me, accessing the truth quite often is actually a very difficult challenge, because often the truth involves people. It involves people operating in space and time with different agendas, with different perspectives on things, and it's a sociology at the end of the day. So I don't think we in this chamber don't accept that things aren't always black and white. But when it comes to issues of austerity and local government cuts, I think we're absolutely clear on the approach that the government should be taking. Local government has disproportionately bore the brunt of austerity, we know that, and that has created huge pressures and really awful circumstances for the people in this chamber. So although I accept the broad points you are making almost theoretically or conceptually, I think you have to contextualise what you're saying. And the reason why you might see difference, dare I say it, and see it being presented as a black and white way, is because we fundamentally do not agree with what the Tory party and your government are doing to the people of this city. In responding to Councillor Ord's comments around planning fraud, electoral fraud and general deviancy, I think those are the 3 points that I can tease out from what was said, it's quite clear that the Deputy Monitoring Officer has asked for all the evidence to be provided to them, and the Chief Executive has also confirmed that he will take an interest in investigating this situation fully and then considering next steps. The comments that Councillor Hines made, I think you're absolutely right. Not only in this country are we seeing the rise of the far right, but around the world, people are looking for people to blame, and quite often they blame people that are different to them. But actually, this city, Salford, actually has a long-standing tradition of multiculturalism and tolerance for difference. We have a Muslim community in this city, a Jewish community in this city. When you look at the docks in the city of Salford, those docks worked and were built off the back of multiculturalism. And we should never forget our history and our past. And absolutely, in this chamber, we stand shoulder to shoulder to fight the rise of fascism in the United Kingdom and around the world. So thank you for your comments, Councillor Hines. And I certainly commit myself to continuing to do that. In terms of Councillor Garrido's comments and the point he made about not responding to the GMSF, I think that was a misunderstanding. I'm not claiming that you've not responded to the GMSF, absolutely not. What I'm saying is, over the past 3 years, this doesn't seem to have been that much of an issue in terms of the issues that are discussed and debated in this chamber. So if I have said you've not responded to the GMSF, I apologise for that, because I wasn't claiming you've not responded, but we can check by re-watching, no problem. But however, what's really interesting in all this is I listened quite carefully to what you had to say. And you know, I'm not questioning your integrity in terms of campaigning on Greenbelt issues. I'm sure you've done that for a lot of your life. I guess the issue I was trying to raise was, why aren't you campaigning against your own party in terms of the prescriptions in the National Planning Policy Framework that all local authorities, not just Salford, are required to take decisions in tandem with? Because the National Planning Policy Framework empowers developers up and down the country. The National Planning Policy Framework and the objectively assessed housing need creates a housing target that every local authority has to deliver. Not only do we have to deliver that in terms of land supply, making land available for development, but we also have to demonstrate that that land is deliverable. So these arguments that are often made about go and build on brownfield, let's protect Greenbelt. Brownfield, you'll all know, requires significant levels of investment from a land assembly, a land remediation, and infrastructure point of view. And you've already heard in this chamber today that at the moment your government, the Conservative Party government, will not give us access to a housing deal with revenue and capital to do brownfield first unless we go above the 201,000 homes in the spatial framework. Your government wants us to commit to building more homes than we're currently proposing to build in Salford, in Greater Manchester. I also think it's a bit disingenuous to talk about Salford's bearing the brunt. We live cheek by jowl with the city of Manchester, and as we know, the city region, the core of Greater Manchester, is where a lot of high-rise properties are being built. Every local authority across Greater Manchester doesn't have the same opportunities to actually build high-rise blocks to meet our objectively assessed housing need, our housing numbers that have been imposed on us by your government, through your government's methodology, through your government telling us to use the sub-national housing projections of 2014. So it is a bit disingenuous, because what we want to do with our housing strategy and the spatial framework is build homes for everybody. And not everybody, as I'm sure you can appreciate, wants to live in an apartment. Many of these apartments, as you know, are unaffordable to people on average wages within Greater Manchester, because of the viability issues that go on with land, and then obviously the cost to build, and then our commitment to affordable housing. All of this is enshrined in the National Planning Policy Framework. If your government gave us more money to build on brownfield land, to build council houses, you know, our housing revenue account has had a cap on for many years. You've been preventing councils up and down the country from actually building truly affordable housing. So I do think it's a bit disingenuous, because it's okay you talking about going to inquiries, but planning is a complex matter, and I'm sure everyone in this chamber appreciates that. And I guess my plea to you is you need to start dealing with the complex detail of the situation, challenging your government, challenging your planning legislation, the National Planning Policy Framework, and how your government commit resources. We know recently we've done work in Greater Manchester in terms of the money available for affordable housing. Increasingly that money is going into London and the South East, despite us here in Greater Manchester having 97,000 people on our collective housing waiting lists. So let's deal with the facts. Let's not deal with the hyperbole of the Conservative Party in Salford. Councillor Antrobus, thank you for your comments as well in terms of responding to comments made by the opposition. I do agree with you. I feel sometimes the opposition are shouting from the sidelines. They're making a lot of noise, but they're not actually dealing with the real complex situation that is 21st century planning, and how actually we need to genuinely reform the whole planning system to enable homes to be built to meet need. Also, thanks also for reiterating that on Broad Oak, we have engaged a top lawyer to fight the City Council's case, the Labour-run City Council's case in that inquiry. I did find it interesting as well, the omission, because at the last inquiry I was asked by Conservative colleagues to also submit a letter in support of the Council's position on Broad Oak, which I did. But needless to say, that wasn't mentioned or highlighted in what our colleagues had to say. Councillor Merry, in many respects, you know, you were responding to Councillor Ord, and also highlighting that you don't always agree with Councillor Lindley. I don't think I've got anything further to say on that matter. Councillor King, thank you for drawing members' attention to the recent training event that the Jewish community put on at King David's School in Manchester. I found that training session exceptionally important, and it was good to see a number of councillors in attendance there, and long may that continue. My understanding is the Jewish community put on these events regularly, so if we can make sure we keep people informed about when they're happening, I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. Because I think it's important we inform ourselves about the communities we seek to represent and serve in the city of Salford. And one of the great ways of doing that is attending training sessions to learn from those communities directly about what they're doing up and down the country in our communities, and to champion the issues and things that concern them. So thanks for drawing our attention to that. And on that, I'll close. Quicker than usual.
Thank you. It's now 1 o'clock, and health and safety says that we'd have to stop very soon anyway, and we asked for health and safety. While not aware, we are covered by the law. At item 16, I'm going through those.
No, you agreed to an extension.
You agreed to an extension. I'm happy. They agreed to an extension. All those in favour to end now? Show of hands. To end the meeting.
We've got 2 items which we'll do very quickly. We've got a few items that we'll do very quickly.
That's what we'll drag it out.
Okay, so let's just be assertive and ask them for a vote if we
Yes,
end the meeting.
so all those in favour to end the meeting now, show of hands, please.
Is to adjourn, yeah.
Those against? The ayes have it. Thank you.